everybody, I'm Doug, that's Connor, and this is the Bethel School District Presents podcast, and today we are at Spanaway Lake High School, joining Emily Peterson, a 13-year veteran teacher here, and two of her AP Government students, Tatiana and Roman. Thank you all for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having us, and Emily, let's start off with the big one. There's an old saying, never discuss politics or religion at the dinner table, and with a hugely contentious election coming up next month and a very divided culture, how do you discuss politics and current events in class without devolving into arguments?
This goes back to kind of my belief about the opposite of never discussing politics or religion at the dinner table, and that generally more discourse leads to better discourse. Like, I've been teaching for a while and through multiple elections and things like that. And this is the idea is like the better we know each other, the more we talk to each other, the better able we are to talk to each other. And so what I found is that, we're going to build into the heavy stuff. There's going to be discussions about contentious issues, immigration, right? We're going to talk about some of these issues in class tomorrow, actually. But if we've had some of the other conversations about, oh, you play basketball, oh, you do this, I know you, and I can have these conversations, and people kind of let that guard down a little bit, they're able to have those discussions. A while back, there's a book that came out. It's called Bowling Alone, and it goes over and it discusses essentially how, we've pulled ourselves away from society and how that affects our inability to have discourse. And that back in the day, people might be part of bowling leagues or other like societal communities where they would build relationships, and therefore they were able to talk to each other. So the goal is really just to build the communities so that people can talk to each other, and then when it does come time to talk about stuff we don't agree on or disagree on, we can actually have discourse instead of debate, and that's kind of the real goal.
Absolutely. And before we started recording, Tatiana, Ms. Peterson mentioned that you have some pretty strong political opinions. So I'm going to kick this same question to you. Do you ever find it difficult to not kind of get too worked up, too emotional when you're talking about stuff in class?
Oh, no. I think it has a lot to do with like understanding people's like opinions and stuff like that and not getting too wild up about that. Being able to understand that there's not like a right answer to politics and stuff like that. That's the main gist of this class. When I get like wild up about something, I just like to hear from the other like point of views and stuff like that, and then I'd be like, oh yeah, that's right, and like, oh yeah, this is also right. But just basically not like judging them like right away, being able to understand and pick apart like pieces from it.
I'd say that's a very grown-up way of thinking, but that's not grown-up at all because most grown-ups don't do that. But it's a very pure way of thinking, at least. What about you, Roman? Are you able to keep it in check during class?
I would say so. I agree with a lot of the points Tatiana made. I have a little bit of a nuanced kind of view of it. I think her view was excellent. The way I see it is that politics aren't personal, or at least they're not supposed to be personal, right? And at the end of the day, I would say most of us in our state, this local area, our country, and I would say people can relate to this, even the citizens of other countries, right? We all just want the best for our collective safety, and we just want to live good lives, right? So when we're arguing politics, not this person's wrong and this person's right, this is good guy, bad guy, saying it's one way or the other way, but saying that this is just two different ways of looking at something, right? And those different perspectives are trying to achieve the same goal. And like Ms. Peterson said too, when you can have discourse and you can come to like a consensus, I think that's often where we get the best ideas, is when both sides reach middle ground.
Wow, just all of your answers right now are reminding me why we're actually here today. I was actually in the AP Government class, just happened to wander in on the first day of school and heard you all already debating the idea of mandatory voting, pros and cons, and a middle ground kind of thing. And it was the discourse even on day one that just impressed me. And I thought we had to have some folks from that class in on the show so we could have a actual intellectual conversation about government, which is severely lacking in the media right now. So I'm excited that we get to do it with a teacher and two of their students. So for you, Emily, why is it important for high school students to start engaging in politics on this deeper level?
So I heard a quote. It had something along the lines of like, you don't learn politics, you do politics. And that really struck a chord with me, especially again, when you're teaching. And there is, it's hard to be a teacher, talking about politics, and kids are like, you want to do this, or what do you think, or what's your opinion, and stuff like that. and trying to get away from the like, what do you think or how do you think? It's more of like, well, how do we get there, right? How do we make decisions, right? The definition of politics is like how things get done, like who's making decisions, how did they get there? And so I think a big part of like learning how politics works is doing politics. And you can't do that without being able to have like understanding and then discussion on that deeper level. And again, the icebreaker to that is like just jump in. Like at some point, you know, we have to stop shying away from like talking about things. And again, you know, you starting with, you know, mandatory voting. We don't have it here. So it's not necessarily a contentious issue because it's not something we have to deal with. But what if it is? What if we had mandatory voting? Should we have it? Should people be forced? And then you kind of get the ball rolling, and that's a good jumping off point for some of those discussions.
So, Roman, you're in AP government. Where is the level of discourse, I guess, and for you, Tatiana, as well, among students? Are they at this deeper level, just in the hallways talking about politics? Maybe not the hallways, but in friend circles and things like that? Or is it kind of just parroting what's in the news that day?
I think it really depends. I think people, and you could say this for, you know, kind of everyone in our nation today, people are at different levels of knowledge of politics and, you know, what they believe, don't believe, and, you know, where they are on the political spectrum. So I think just as diverse as this school is, the political opinions as well are very diverse, and the political knowledge is diverse. So I think learning, and what's important about AP Gov, in my opinion, is learning about what is the facts, right? What is written in the Constitution? What is written in laws? What are the facts of this and that Supreme Court case? What is the history of it? I think is really important because forming that more informed decision, you can then inform others as well, and it's just overall kind of increasing the political knowledge and just the informity at the school.
Around school, politics are like not really talked about, and if it is, it's probably just about the presidential election coming up. But it's just like coming in this class, it's so much more because we're like learning from like the very beginning, like how it was all created and like why do we have so many branches and stuff like that. I just think it's pretty cool that we get to talk about other things than just the presidential election coming up, like our elections for government and stuff like that, and just like not being biased, because a lot of people are really biased to politics and they don't like to talk about it. Like I had a teacher actually today in band, he was talking about Taylor Swift, and like we were getting into it and stuff like that, and he was like, wait, don't talk about her because I don't like to talk about politics in class. And it's just like it's everywhere but nowhere at the same time, if you know what I mean.
Wow. I know, my Tay-Tay is politicized. I'm very upset right now. Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned Supreme Court cases, Roman. Did any of you know that the Bethel School District is part of a famous Supreme Court case?
Oh, really?
It is. That's your homework, I guess, if you want to check that out. And
That's
for you
Unit
listeners,
3.
too. Unit 3, you're going to learn about it in class. I love that.
So here's kind of a hypothetical for you, Tatiana. If you could change or improve one element of our country's political system, what would it be and why?
Okay, I actually wrote this one down. I would change campaign finances and stuff like that, because we have so many people with so many like open minds and open to changes and stuff like that, but the cost for it to like even get your voice being heard is just like outrageous, especially nowadays. I would definitely change that. There's so many like open people around the world than just the people that we hear now, and like probably problems that we don't even know that they're going through right now. And they can like compare like with people around us that like people are probably like shushed or like not really heard of. And I think, yeah, I would probably change that.
Yeah, that's an excellent answer, and always be better if we can have more equitable systems of people making their voices heard. What about you, Roman? What changes would you make?
I think what Tatiana said is definitely good. For me, I would say party politics. I think even in learning about history, right, George Washington in his farewell address, one of the things he says is basically don't get involved in political parties. And what does our nation do? We build 2 political parties right off the bat after Washington steps down. So, and you really see a lot of the things he said in that are kind of coming true, right? When you get involved with party politics, then that's where your divisions come from, and we see that all the time throughout our nation's history. So I wish our candidates and our politics were more individual issue based, right? Because nobody is really in one camp or the other camp, right? A lot of people have, mixed views from both, and I believe even Ms. Peterson said, and others have said, most Americans would really truly identify as an independent, right? And I think that's very true, just talking to people and saying, well, I agree with this, but not this, but I'm supposed to be with this candidate who's completely, just 100% for these views and that's it. Moving away or shying away from the hardline party system could be very helpful in just hearing everyone's voice and not appealing to extremes so much.
So we kind of had this talk about the vice presidential debate the other night and how much commentary there is that it was refreshing, right? Hey, people actually talked about issues and they had a substantive discussion, and at multiple points there was a, you know what, I actually agree with you and I see your point of view, or yeah, I think we actually agree on that, right? And so you see that still, so it's not gone. And I think that as long as we keep reminding ourselves that we have stuff in common and that those will bring us together, that's kind of a part of it.
I love that, and great answers all around. For you, Emily, have you always been interested in politics? What made you want to focus teaching in this area?
Yeah, I was very invested in school government. I was ASB president, all of that kind of stuff, and I got pretty interested. I had an amazing teacher my senior year. We had a combined CW PE civics course. He was a great teacher, and that was also not too long after the 2000 election where George W. Bush won the Electoral College, Al Gore won the popular vote, and that was probably the first time I'd ever seen an election where I was like, wait a minute, somebody can win but not win, but somebody else, and then the Supreme Court case to follow and things like that. And I would say really after that point, I was kind of hooked. I knew that I was going to go into teaching when I entered college, and I was on the social studies path, and I was really lucky to fall into it here. I taught world history at first, and then I picked up AP Gov, and I've been teaching it for 10 years, and I don't think I'm going back.
Well, I hope you don't, given the level of conversation that's at the table. All three of you are showing Connor and I up right now if you listen to any other episode of the podcast.
So, Emily, we're in your classroom right now, and you have a bunch of really cool zines lined up behind us. Can you tell us a little bit about those and what the project is that brought those zines here?
And for our older listeners like myself, tell us what a zine is.
A zine is a self-published magazine. And so essentially it allows students to express their ideas through a self-published magazine, which theoretically we could easily copy and distribute. But what we've been doing is using this project, and I have to give credit to a former student teacher of mine who also introduced me to them, Miss Cunin, a few years ago here at Spanaway Lake. She kind of brought me into this world of zines, and what we've done is been able to build kind of this post-AP exam project based off of it. One of the main goals going into AP Gov that I have just as an overarching topic is how democratic is the United States. And as we learn about democracy and democratic elements, voting, things like that throughout the year, my goal is by that time students are able to generate, a claim around that or have ideas about that. And so what we do is we dive in as a class and examine the kind of a timeline of voting rights together with other elements, whether it be like we talked about gerrymandering and civics today, just some other things. And we do a case study of the territories. So we look at Puerto Rico or Guam and use those as kind of examples of, how does democracy work in places that aren't recognized as U.S. states. And then we come together. We create a class zine. If there was a 28th Amendment, what voting amendment would you pass? And so you'll see the 28th Amendment zine project where students float, term limits, going back to the question about if you could change one thing. We see a lot of there should be term limits for senators, take money out of politics, get rid of gerrymandering, those types of things. And then individually students will investigate how democratic is the United States, and they'll show that in their zine.
Love that. That's really cool. And we've been talking about some big issues already. So I have a question for the students here. You're young. We're old. Looking at all of these things that are happening politically right now, are you feeling hopeful for our country politically, or do you have some doubts? We'll start with you, Roman.
Wow, that's a big question there. I would say for me right now, I think it's important that instead of forming an opinion about what's going to happen, what's not going to happen, just kind of playing it by ear, right? See how the polls come out this November and with all the elections, not just the presidential one. and then until January, right, when the new administration kind of takes office, regardless of who wins, playing it by ear and just saying, well, I hope the best, and then as policies are made, making judgments on them as they come. A lot of unknowns right now, so I would say not good to form an opinion quite yet.
Very pragmatic.
I was going to say super pragmatic.
Tatiana, what about you? Optimistic, pessimistic about the future of our country?
Basically, I want to piggyback off what he said. Definitely don't want to assume anything because anything is possible, and we've found that out. The new generation that's getting to voting right now is our generation, and we're definitely like more hands-on. We're more engaged, I want to say. But we definitely do have a lot of opinions, and sometimes when we have a lot of opinions, we don't like form well with different people's other opinions, so it's kind of hard like that. But I definitely don't want to assume anything and just like keep an open mind.
Well, I got to say, just talking to you and hearing just how, I don't know how to say it, how much smarter than I am you already are, gives me hope for the future of this country. I think your generation, our generation, Connor's and mine, we
Don't
had
lump us together. We're in different generations.
we had a lot of slacking to do in the 90s, and so we were really busy with that and not as busy with, making the country better. But I'm glad you all are picking up that mantle. I think that's a great thing. We have a fun final question for all three of you, and we're just going to name drop Rick Steves. We're hoping to have him on the podcast one day, travel expert. He has a book called Travel as a Political Act, and in it he argues that travel can be a powerful tool for challenging stereotypes, promoting social justice, and encouraging a more informed worldview. So with that in mind, we'll go around the table and start with you, Emily. Where's a place you've traveled to that really impacted the way that you see the world?
Well, can I just say two things real quick? Is one, I'm also a big Rick Steves fan, so invite me if he comes on the podcast. He actually spoke at my sister's graduation. He was a commencement speaker, and he did this exact talk.
Oh,
and so when I
wow.
saw this question, I was very excited because I got to sit there and listen to him talk about it. I've traveled a fair amount, and I will also kind of add to that is that I have a young daughter, and one of our goals is to do just this. We are very much trying to get her out in the world to see how different people live, how different societies work, things like that, so that she can do all of these things and form those opinions. But I would say, so just this last year, we went to Belize and then we went into Guatemala, which was my first time to Central America. And we had this amazing guide who the whole time spoke to us about the Guatemalan Revolution, like Civil War, how his family got displaced. We were able to see schools kind of through rural Guatemala and kind of get an understanding of how they only go to school half day because then they go home and have to help with chores, and how those systems work. And watching my daughter be able to see that, I felt grateful that we can have those experiences and she can see those experiences, and also grateful that we come from a place where we don't have to have those struggles, but also taking that back with us, understanding like how we can help impact the world to alleviate those stresses from other people as well.
Great answer. And Tatiana, you're a lot younger, so you'll be forgiven if you haven't seen as much of the world as your teacher. But have there been places you visited that have really changed the way you see the world?
Yes. About a year ago, I went to Paris, France, because my Aunt Catherine, she lives out there, and it's definitely a culture shock. It's not really all hyped up, but it's meant to be. It's definitely a little smelly out there, but it's really diverse. I do like the people. The place is a really nice place. Also, getting to understand different like viewpoints out there and how they view us in the United States is a little like culture shock as well. It is pretty cool to go out there and visit different places and see how they see us and see how we see them. And overall, I think it's pretty cool.
Roman, what about you?
Well, I definitely haven't traveled as far as either of those places, and I'm very happy that both of you have got those experiences. Mine, I would say, is a lot more local, and that is just through traveling with, whether that be school sports or clubs or, ROTC, and going around to competitions at other schools just within the state, and we even went to Oregon last year. You really get to see within our own, relatively local area, how different people live and how diverse that is just within itself, right? You see communities who are less fortunate than you, who are more fortunate than you, and how that affects their worldview and their way of life, and just really learning about where all these diverse perspectives come from. I think that's really what I've learned out of travel, is maybe not necessarily as impactful, maybe equally as impactful, depending on what you believe in that. I'm not here to judge that or say that it is or isn't. But I would say we're such a large country, and even the states, they're not the biggest land masses in the world, but they're bigger than a lot of countries. So just that distance and those economic differences, you really can see change even just within our state.
Absolutely. And you bring up a great point. Even in being here in Spanaway and going down to Tacoma, you're going to see very different ways of life for a lot of different people. And if you go up to Seattle, it's even different. You go over to Spokane, just even staying in Washington, there's a lot you can learn from any type of travel. I think that's a great point to bring up. Thank you.
Well, what a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Emily Peterson, Tatiana, and Roman. We really feel fortunate that you've been able to share your wisdom on these subjects with us, and we will be back next week with something probably not as good as this.
Well, thank you again to Emily Peterson, AP Government and Civics teacher at Spanaway Lake High School, and Tatiana and Roman, both seniors, both brilliant, and I'm very excited to see where they're heading after high school. We'll be back again next week.